Hey, Sens fans, welcome to a special edition, the Trade Deadline edition of the Senstennial Podcast. We're excited to join you today in all of our glory. It's a nice sunny Friday, and Steve Staios went to work early on Trade Deadline Day, but no, I guess not that early. But regardless, one of the first trades of the day, and it was a big one, sending out longtime Senator Josh Norris to Buffalo in exchange for slightly younger center in Dylan Cozens. Big change of money. I believe it was the first trade involving two players making $7+ million since 2018. So 7 years since a deal of that magnitude in terms of money swap happened, which
Oh,
is very
really?
interesting. Two players that on opposite teams making 7+ mil. Yeah, that's what
Wow.
I read earlier. So someone can fact check me in the comments. I read that online, and you know how nobody lies on the internet, so it should be true. Uh, but yeah, so Dylan Cozens comes back to Ottawa along with Dennis Gilbert, left-hand defenseman, and a second round draft pick in 2026. Ottawa also sent out defenseman Jacob Bernard Docker to Buffalo, so at least Norris and JBD have a little bit of friends along the way with them as they go to the dark and gloomy Buffalo franchise. And Eric Brandstrom is also joining them there because he was traded there from the Rangers. So they can all have a
Incredible.
little reunion and cry together. But on that note, before we get to anything else, let's talk about that trade. And Bennett, I'll let you talk about the Josh Norris deal first.
Yeah, there'd been rumors swirling for a couple of days that the Senators might be interested in moving on from Norris. And obviously, the rumors solidified this morning into this deal with Buffalo, of which the details were a little slow to come out, but eventually were confirmed shortly after noon. And I think it's good. As listeners will know, I've at times been hard on Josh Norris. I know that a lot of his sort of trials and tribulations in the last couple of years have not really been his fault per se. He's had a lot of uh, trouble staying healthy, and when he has been here, he's looked like a guy who has just not played a lot of games recently. And this season has been something of a bounce back for him. But even then, he's missed a few games. He's got 20 goals, which is nice, 13 assists, which is okay. Um, you know, he's got 33 points in 53 games. It's not bad, but it's not what you expect from someone making a hair under 8 million. And that's always been the problem with Norris post 21-22 is that he got signed to that big extension, which I think most Senators fans would agree was a whiff from Dorion at this point. And, with Norris starting to find his game a little bit again, but still looking shaky at times, the Senators decided to cash in at a point where his value was higher than it's been in a couple of years, and I think that was the wise decision to make. Dylan Cozens is a guy that comes in with a fair amount of upside. This is someone that Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts was saying months ago would be like a prime candidate to break out on another team if he got traded out of Buffalo. Um, I think that he's perhaps not exactly a like for like replacement because his defensive metrics aren't as reliable as Norris's are. But hey, we traded our second line center. We got a second line center back. We didn't have to retain any salary. We're saving a little bit of money, and that made room for other moves on the roster, which we'll get to later. But I'm not sad to see the back of JBD. I don't think he's a terrible player. He just he's had plenty of opportunities in Ottawa and he's never really established himself. And at a certain point, you got to cut bait on guys like that. And, Gilbert is like a seventh D. Again, doesn't really move a lot, but getting a second round pick back is nice. I think it demonstrates that the Sens were selling high and the Sabres were selling low. And I think that Staios has been patient. And if they'd wanted to move on from Norris, they chose the right time to do it, and seemingly so far the right deal to make. Now, the only way I can see this blowing up in our faces, I I find it strongly unlikely that Norris becomes a 30 goal a year in, year out guy. I don't think that he's showed enough consistency offensively to do that, or in terms of staying healthy. So the likelihood of us having traded like a potential 30, 35 goal scorer to a division rival is, I think, relatively low. The way that I see this blowing up in our face is just in terms of like locker room vibes and atmosphere. Not that I think that Cozens is a problem by any means, but I just think Josh Norris was just a really well liked guy in the room, and has been up until this point a very tight knit group of players here in Ottawa. Um, and you saw the emotion on someone like Brady Tkachuk hearing about the trade today. So obviously that's a risk. But I think it's a risk worth taking because this core, such as it is, has been together for a number of years now, and this is the first time that we've had a sniff of a playoff spot. And you can't just run it back year after year after year, hoping that the team all takes a big leap forward together. It doesn't usually happen that way. I think a little bit of a shakeup here is probably what was needed.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it kind of sucks for Josh Norris. He has to go to Buffalo. I agree with you that grabbing that second round pick for next year was a good call. 2026 is supposed to be a better draft than 2025. Ottawa may not have a first round pick next year, depending on which pick they choose to forfeit for the whole NHL shenanigans. We won't get into it. But if Buffalo again is looking to sell next season because Alex Tuck will be a pending UFA during next season, so if they decide to sell again at the deadline and they're not a good team, who knows? That pick could be high in the 30s, maybe early 40s. Anyway, it could be a pretty decent pick for the Sens if they end up losing their first round pick next year. And they also have 3 third round picks next year. So it does, give them a little bit of a cushion if they do need to forfeit or if they decide to forfeit next year's pick. But Matt, yeah, I want to get your thoughts as well and what you thought about the mainly Norris for Cozens swap.
I've been a pretty staunch Norris truther on this podcast, and Bennett has not, and um, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to have differing opinions. However, he's absolutely right. I look at Josh Norris and I see a guy that has the capability of scoring 30, 35 goals, maybe even 40 goals a year. The issue I have with Josh Norris over the past 2 seasons, he's played a good chunk of games. Um, with the caveat that he does get hurt, though, is that he cannot drive play. That was, for me, his biggest weakness. He could not drive play. And someone posted in the Ottawa Senators subreddit the 2 player cards from Sport Logic. And the difference to me in those 2 cards was staunch. Like, obviously Josh Norris has great shooting metrics, but his playmaking and puck moving compared to Cozens it's like astronomical differences. Dylan Cozens is a puck mover. He can drive play. And that, to me, is what you need, because you too many times do we have passengers on this team. For me, the best and one of the most consistent and effective play drivers on the team is Tim Stützle. Brady Tkachuk can do it at times. Drake Batherson can do it at times. You need a guy on each line that can do it. And for me, Dylan Cozens looks to be that guy. And, a lot of people have talked about, especially this season, his point totals have not been good. It's Buffalo. And I'm very much, I feel so bad for Buffalo Sabres fans because we haven't been there, but it looked like we were going to get there. And at a point, you just feel for them because their ownership is shit. Their management sucks. And a perfect example of how their management sucks. they added a second to this deal. I personally, and I saw a lot of takes that were against this one, but I think Dylan Cozens is the best player in this trade. I don't think it's Norris.
Interesting.
And the difference is that Norris, he's very good defensively, but he does not drive play. And if you're a center, what are you doing? That's the point of you. You need to be a play driver. And unfortunately, he just never was. And I mean, the goal he scored against Chicago the other night was beautiful. That Josh Norris, if you get that Josh Norris, hell yeah. But you need someone feeding him the puck. And to me, that's not the definition of what a center should be doing. So that's my biggest takeaway. You get cheaper, you get younger, and you get healthier. And that's my other big point. Dylan Cozens has missed, I think it's a collective 10 games over the last 3 seasons. That versus Josh Norris, I think it's well over 50. It might be just a hair under 100. But like I take 80 games of Dylan Cozens versus 50 of Josh Norris, even if Dylan Cozens is being a passenger.
And I think that's the thing that was being talked about a lot on TSN 1200 when this trade broke, was the fact that the best part of, ability is a player's availability. And that's, I know, one of the things that they trademark quite a bit over there on that show. But, going back before this season, the previous 3 seasons, he played 79 games, 81 games, 79 games. So you're getting essentially a full season of games out of him, and you need that. And I agree. I would like to see more of Cozens, because I'll be honest with you, I don't pay particular attention to every single guy on the opposing team when I watch games. Obviously every now and then a guy sticks out and you're like, oh, that player had a great game. Like against Chicago the other day, Ryan Donato was a guy who you noticed, and he was the best player on the ice for Chicago. So it'll be interesting to see how he drives play. But I think, like you said, Tim Stützle drives the play for the first line. If Cozens on the second line, hopefully he drives play there. And then you have Pinto, who to me drives play as well on your third line. And he won't be a defensive, like super defensive, responsible beast type guy. Norris, I don't think, was like a defensive beast, but I think he was decent defensively, and he was great on the penalty kill, as we all know. But what he will give you is a lot of hits. He now swaps places with Norris. Norris was second on the team in hits with 133. Now Cozens comes in and he's second on the Sens in hits with 148. So he gets lots of hits. Oh, excuse me. He's a positive. I like choked on my own spit. Sorry, folks.
In there.
And he's also a positive face-off guy. He's over 50%. And I think if the Sens were going to send out Josh Norris, who is, generally a good face-off taker, they wanted to get a guy who was positive in that regard coming back. So to me, that's just a bonus. But I will say, for all the Josh Norris fans out there, I feel for you. Yeah. I agree. He had immaculate vibes, and like Bennett said, the one potential area for blowback on this trade is how it impacts the locker room. I'm hoping that the players understand why this move was made and what Staios saw in this trade. And hopefully going forward, this proves to be fruitful for the Sens. And we'll just have to wait and see. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, we all know hockey is a business. They want to make the moves that give the team the best chance of winning. Josh Norris, if he can play like we've seen him play in the past and can score at the rate he was, that'll be great. But the other thing is he wasn't putting up as many points as I think we wanted on the power play, and Ottawa's 5v5 scoring was really low. So I think bringing in a guy like Cozens, who has a bit more 5v5 scoring in terms of how many points he gets on the power play to even strength than Josh Norris, will benefit the Sens. And I think that they looked for this specifically because the next player that we're going to get to also had more 5v5 production. And that one was one that came in under the wire at the end of the trade deadline as things were cutting off. Garriock and Julie McKenzie of The Athletic both mentioned that a trade was in the works from the Sens with San Jose. And then it came out that it was Fabian Zetterlund from the San Jose Sharks. He's been a really good player for them this season in a depth role, but he's also had some time playing with Macklin Celebrini. He's got 36 points in 64 games. So funny enough, he's got more points than either of Norris or Cozens. So is he the best player of the day the Suns picked up? I don't know. You decide. But the guy has 17 goals on the season. Last year, he had 24 goals. He is going to be an RFA at the end of the season. He's only 25, but he's a big boy. 220 pounds is what he's listed at on Hockey Reference. And he has quite a lethal shot. Of course, he's a Swede, so I'm sure Alfie and Olmark will both enjoy that. And he comes in with a plus minus of +8. And normally I don't talk about plus minus.
That's shocking.
I normally don't talk about plus minus, but the Sharks on the season already have nearly 50 losses and have a goal differential of like minus 70 something. And this guy's a +8. So, you know what? I got to give him credit. That is quite the feat to accomplish. But anyway, I'll get over my tangent and I'll flip it to Matt first to talk about the Zetterlund deal that came in right at the deadline.
I love it. I saw that the Sens were potentially making a move, and one of my buddies texted me that it was going to be Fabian Zetterlund, and I immediately remembered many of the games that we've played against San Jose and said that's one of their few good players. Then I looked up his stats and was even more surprised. 36 points for like a top 9 forward coming from San Jose is like that's what we need. We need more scoring. And quite frankly, we gave up very little. I know we have talked about Zach Ostapchuk, and he was a good prospect. And I don't think now was really the time for him to graduate. So when he did, his offensive capabilities just weren't there. So he's shipped out. Noah Gregor is shipped out, who has one of the worst offensive metrics. I think he does have the worst offensive metrics in the league. You get an AHL player in Tristan Robbins, and you give up a second. This team, to me, looking at it from what's happened so far, is much better than it was at 8 a.m. this morning. I think Staios believes in this team. Staios really said, we're just at the cusp and it's time to reward these guys for playing hard. So I think Zetterlund's going to fit perfectly. And one of the big points is that both Zetterlund and Cozens rank second and third in 5-on-5 scoring for the Sens, which we just have not had all season. And so we need it. And if our scoring gets going and it's coupled with how our defense has been and how our goaltending has been, things are good.
Can't argue with with you on that one. Bennett, what did you think about Zetterlund coming on to the club?
I think it was another smart move. Matt touched on all of the key points as the guy who has an ability to score at 5-on-5, which is a significant weakness on the roster this year. He's a middle six winger, which is what the Sens needed. Our wing depth has been very shaky this year. And I think that whereas Cozens and Norris was something of it was like people have been saying, it was a hockey trade. Might not have been exactly like for like, but you're basically swapping a second line center for a second line center, and then we get a pick back. And, it's like a second line center for a second line center, a seventh D for a seventh D, and then we get a pick. So that's pretty much a lateral move plus the pick. This was an actual ad, and that's, I think, a fair reflection of where the team is this year. I think the team would have been disappointed to not receive any reinforcements at the deadline when teams around them are adding. And I think that the team's play, perhaps not so much in the last few weeks, but over the course of the season, has largely earned them the right to see a new face in the locker room at this time of year. And so I think that Staios has done a decent job. I think there are potentially better players available to fit that role, but maybe not for the price that the Sens were willing to pay or the cap room that we have. And so I think that right now, this was about as good as we could hope for at this particular deadline, with the cap being what it is and the team being where it is. And I look forward to seeing what he can do. If he, if he can be an outlet for someone like Shane Pinto on a third line, let's say, maybe get some looks on power play too. I'd be curious to see how that could pan out. We were talking before about Pinto's ability to drive play. He has not had very capable line mates this year. Pinto's been doing a lot of work on breakaways coming out of the penalty kill. He's having to do a lot of work himself this season. And, if he has someone to pass to that can get in scoring positions and shoot the puck to places where the goalie isn't, hey, that's I'm not a doctor, but I think that's a good thing.
I like it. No, Zetterlund definitely has a good wrist shot from what I've seen. One interesting side part about it is that he was interested in staying with San Jose. His agent of all people is Claude Lemieux. And as we know, Brady Tkachuk doesn't have a good record with Claude's son there, Brendan Lemieux. But bit of a brickhead, but that's okay. So Claude Lemieux mentioned that they had submitted a counteroffer to the San Jose Sharks and that San Jose didn't get back to him, and then Zetterlund was traded. So he said, I don't know if we take that as a no or not, but I think that's a no. So I think Julian McKenzie was the one who followed it up, mentioning that Zetterlund's probably looking in the, 2.8 to like $3.2 million range on his next contract. So bit of an audition for him with the Sens to see how he can perform down the stretch here and hopefully into the playoffs and see what he gets with the Sens. But that would be something that would basically just be covered by Forsberg not being re-signed. So that seems like if that's what he's asking for and he fits in with the team and like you said, Bennett plays well with Pinto, then that could be a guy who gets extended with the Sens. So definitely a lot of upside. And that also feels like what the Sens were trying to do today is find guys who were young, had upside, and could grow with the team and be around the same age as some of the core players. So that also was nice to see. And I think one underrated side component of this trade was, Ostapchuk was shipped out and he was a decent player in Belleville, but they brought back Tristan Robbins, who is actually a British player, which is interesting, but he's been playing. Cool. Yeah, he's been playing fairly well in the AHL this season. And I think that helps Belleville because they're looking to make a push for the playoffs as well. And so that kind of upgrades Belleville and helps them, which I think is kind of nice as well. And you get a 4th round pick. So, you're not completely losing a draft selection. You're moving back a couple rounds, but you still get some shots at some magic beans. So I think that all in all, Ottawa did well. And in my opinion, it wasn't hype like, getting Chychrun or DeBrincat, but Staios targeted areas that I think Ottawa needed to improve. Yeah. And like you even look at Dennis Gilbert, he's not a flashy player. He's just a guy. He's a defenseman who can hold his own at the NHL level, but he gives Ottawa depth at left-handed defense. Because if Cleven gets injured again, who are you going to, you can't, well, with Ottawa's current system, you're not going to run 2 right-handed defensemen, right? So having a guy now who can step in if Cleven's injured and play on the left side also really helps the club. So I think Staios just targeted all the little small things they needed to really improve as a club. And that was for I would say, the first deadline where he was settled in as a GM, and his first go around without all the chaos prior to the team being purchased. I think now finally he can settle in, and this was a good first deadline for me.
Yeah, and I look at last year's deadline. There weren't many sellable pieces, anyways. Tarasenko gets you a third, and also, just as a side note, Tarasenko's game has fallen off a cliff this season. He is horrendous. With that said, though, I look at this trade deadline, and it sets Ottawa up very nicely for the future. Zetterlund is still an RFA going into this summer. You now have like kind of a cost controlled player there. They're not going to jump immediately. You see how it goes. You improve your third line, and then you improve your, in my opinion, second line center spot. But ultimately, the big game fishing is always going to get done in the off season, and you look for players that are willing to come in at maybe a bit of a higher number because they won't get it somewhere else, and that's what you have to do for a Canadian market. But that's when you're going to see additions like adding maybe another right shot D that will overtake what Jensen has been, and then looking for a long-term winger for Timmy Stew. But for me, this was probably one of the most ideal trade deadlines that Staios could have had, because we were all kind of thinking maybe he's going to scour the waivers, and yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you for tuning in for our little Sens trade deadline recap. Really appreciate it. And can't wait to see how the last 20 odd games go down the stretch. And hopefully, please, hockey gods, can we see some friggin' playoff hockey in this city? All right. I'm sick and tired of this crap. All right. Go Sens, go.
It's a long off season if you don't make the playoffs. And it would be really nice.
Bennett will break his other arm punching his wall again.
Oh. That's right. That's right.
All right. Thanks for listening and watching, and go Sens, go.
Bye, Josh.
Go Sens, go. Oh, yeah. Bye, Josh.
Ouch.